to today's Energy Central Power Session entitled, After Digitization, Taking Advantage of Data to Improve Safety, Productivity, Reliability, and Decision-Making. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Fulcrum, for making today's event possible. Fulcrum improves the way field teams work by streamlining inspection processes to ensure safer, higher quality, and compliant outcomes. Field teams use Fulcrum's no-code field inspection management platform to remove dependency on IT, allowing non-developers to build location-aware applications in minutes and hours rather than weeks or months. The result is a data-driven approach to managing field inspection teams that improve team performance, keep infrastructure projects on track, ensures existing infrastructure and service availability, and eliminates regulatory compliance headaches. Thank you, Fulcrum, for coming on and making today's possible. That's pretty exciting what you all are able to do for the industry. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to our moderator, Peter Key, to kick things off. Peter, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thanks, PJ. Hello to our panelists and hello everybody watching. As PJ said, I'll be moderating today's power session. Matt Chester, Energy Central's community manager, will be watching behind the scenes and helping me with the audience question segments. Before we start, I'd like to say that I've been thinking of, and I'm sure a lot of you out there have been thinking of, the people who've been responding to and people who have been hurt by the hurricane down in Florida. Some of the stuff we talk about today that has to do with data being used in the field, I'm sure are things that can be used eventually to help the utility people who have to respond to such things if they're not already being used now. I think you'll find this power session very interesting. I've really enjoyed learning the panelists' thoughts about the topic we're covering today, and I think you will too. I'll introduce myself a little more. I'm a recovering business journalist who has spent many years writing about information technology and the electric power industry, and this power session brings them both together. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Jake.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Freevold. I'm VP of Product Marketing at Fulcrum. I've been with Fulcrum for about 3 years. I've been in the data integration, business intelligence, and analytics field for about 25 years, and I've really focused on some of the more practical aspects of making things happen with data, so to speak. Fulcrum itself is a field inspection management platform, which is really focused on bringing together data collection, because every inspection is a form of data collection, workflow automation, and location awareness and visualization for teams who are involved in inspections. So that's the perspective that I'll be coming with today, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Jake. Jason, please tell us a little about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Name is Jason Butner. I'm Vice President of Engineering at Cobra Vision. I've been in the utility industry for almost 20 years, working at Ameren Corporation based out of St. Louis, generation and transmission side of the house. And then went to Oracle for 5 years, working with utilities all across the nation, or I'd say from sea to shining sea. And then launched out recently and started our own company, Cobra Vision. And what we do is artificial intelligence for utilities. We'll get into it more later, but just, seeing where we can create value, especially in the areas of safety, construction quality, and asset inspection. I've got 6 kids. I live in St. Louis, and I'm president of a school board at a small private Christian school in St. Louis. So there you go. Looking for more things to do.
Yeah. With 6 kids, I kind of doubt that that's true. Thanks, Jason.
Yep.
Dave, tell us a little about yourself, please.
Sure. My name is Dave Cerny. I am the Director of Quality for Orgis Energy. Orgis is a renewable EPC. We also have I like to say, sister side of our company, which is Orgis Services. They take care of our operations and maintenance after we build the sites. And I've been in the power industry for myself 20 plus years. 16 of those have been in renewables from, pardon me, from distribution, transmission, solar, wind. I've got to been able to travel the world and the United States with my job. So it's great to be where we are now with technology, and I'm excited to work with this group that panelists that we spent a little bit of time together learning about each other, and we're very important to you guys today.
Thanks, David. It's been fun to work with all you guys too, and I think this will be great. So the title of this power session is After Digitization, Taking Advantage of Data to Improve Safety, Productivity, Reliability, and Decision-Making. So I thought we'd start out by letting the panelists give their thoughts about what the phrase after digitization means. We'll then look at how data can improve safety and productivity, take some questions from the audience, talk about how data can improve reliability and decision-making, get some final thoughts from the panelists, and answer more questions from the audience. So we'll start here with Jake. What does after digitization mean to you, and what do you think it means for companies in the electric power industry?
Sure, we have a lot of clients who are focused on digitization because they see that as the first major benefit that they can get. They see digitization as providing certain forms of productivity and whatnot. But when we talk about going beyond digitization, I think it's important to look at things in the past that have been digitized and learn from them somewhat. So I think about, for example, when we went from tape and vinyl to CDs, and then after CDs to pure digital streaming and so on. And the reason it's valuable to think about that is we can easily see three categories of things that occurred. The first was the digitization itself, which enabled certain kinds of simple things. How do I share my music more effectively? I no longer need a physical medium, for example. The first digitization was on a physical medium, but later we didn't need that. The second is that we can transform existing things. We know that we sell, for example, well, it changed the way that we were able to sell things. And then we're able, though, to reshape to some extent those things that we didn't even know that we were going to reshape. We started entirely different business models. We started to change the way we do distribution entirely, not just for music, but other things that are related to music like film and so on. So I think that it's good for us to think in terms of the categories of things that change, whether we know what is going to change or not. And actually, I think you're going to hear a lot about things that are relatively new in that respect, things that we didn't know would change back when we started doing digitization, and things that are changing now, and maybe some of the stuff that's on the horizon as well. So that's my kind of nutshell on why I think beyond digitization is such an important topic.
Thanks, Jake. I agree. I think one of the most interesting things about covering this type of stuff is seeing what will happen that you never anticipated would happen, and what isn't happening that you thought might happen. Jason, what about you? How do you define after digitization?
So it's funny that Jake is very similar thought to what I had preparing for this. We have a presentation that we give, and it's kind of educational. It's called the Arc of AI. The Arc of AI, and it starts with from the beginning of time, and it goes to it starts with cave paintings and moves on to books and magazines, pamphlets, eventually digitization, right? But all that stuff's the same thing. We're trying to communicate information to people about, where to get food, what to, decisions to make, who's just performed a recent conquest, where can we find safety? It's just information. It started in the cave paintings. Digitization has just sped it up and made the packet size smaller. But even with digitization, what we've seen is the human, and I know this is going to sound really cold, guys, but the human is the limiting factor. So we can even get tablets in inspectors' hands, and we can, get change orders moving directly from the field. That's very important. Okay, for me, when I was in the utility, I needed information fast. It needed to be reliable and accurate. And so to get a tablet in somebody's hands that was actually taking notes in the field and communicating back to the back office was the best. I had the best cost information, all that, but it still relies on a human to enter it. And what we're learning is that maybe if we keep looking out into the future, and I don't really think it's maybe, I think it's going to happen, is that artificial intelligence and all the subsets of it, machine learning, computer vision, etc., are going to replace, wherever possible, computer code and human data entry, because it will be faster and more reliable. And so that's what I see. Three areas again that we're looking at: safety, inspection, and asset management. But there's a lot of areas where, after digitization in the area of artificial intelligence can be relevant in utilities.
Thanks, Jason. David, what about you? How do you define after digitization?
Well, I think about the old days when the field team was out in the field to do inspections, right? We had a clipboard that we carried around. We had a document that was, typed up, or they were just jotting down notes, right? You're out in the elements. You got to flip over to something, and then all of a sudden you got paper blowing everywhere. Then you got to reach down and get a camera, right? And you got to take a picture. You got blueprints, right? And you're going to get them out, you're going to put them on the hood of a truck, and they're going to get ripped and torn and finger smudges. And as the guys are writing things down, you got smudged ink. You got people that don't know how to spell certain things. You got smudged ink. One of the things that I've talked to Jake about a while back with using Fulcrum is that when we go through and I set out what the guys need to go out and inspect, I have drop downs for everything. Like, this is the criteria, but I also keep an other category in there to where, here we go with the human typing things in, right? We don't want the human typing things in because 7 ways to spell Slumberjay, right? We all know the company Slumberjay, have probably heard about it, but if you try to get everybody's perspective, even the panelists here, if I ask them how to spell it, we'd all have a different way to do it. So when we can take that data down to a point where the human's not touching it, then when we go back and look at it and do it, the analysis on it, then we don't have those errors, right? Because when you try to filter the word Slumberjay, you may spell it correctly, but you probably have 7 other different views in there. After the field team's done, somebody in the older days would have to input that. They would have to fax it. We would have to put that into a spreadsheet. Digital tools, currently in our industry that we have right now, they've taken the place of everything that we do. The accuracy is amazing. We're able to drop prints in and spec sheets into the actual app and say, okay, these are the things that you need to be looking for when you're out inspecting this. The other good thing is that you have, real-time data, right? I mean, your data that we have on our iPads is flowing back real time. So if there's ever an issue, the guys can generate a report. I can look at it right there. And then the other thing is that when you have an issue out in the field, and I think this is what Jason was saying as well, like, you can get on a meeting, you can take the pictures, you can get on FaceTime or whatever, and have a discussion with the manufacturer, with the engineers. And then right there, you can make real-time, decisions on what we need to do on things. So it's really helped our side of the business very, very much.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody, for getting us off to a good start. Now that we know kind of where we are starting from after, and know where companies are starting from after they're digitized and what that means, start looking at how all the data that digitization allows companies to collect and process can help their operations. And we'll start with how it can be used to improve safety. So Jason, would you like to start us off, please?
Yeah, sure. So, a couple of things when you think about safety and utilities is the safety of the people working on the utility. There's thousands and thousands of people, whether it's generation, transmission, distribution. There's also public safety. So in the areas of safety, things that we address, we use computer vision, for instance. We have monitored over 50 active construction sites in utilities, substation construction sites, for safety using computer vision. And we can find anything from PPE issues, where people aren't following the safety protocols, to when their spotter is not present, when vehicles are moving around, or proximity of vehicles as they move through the yard, and be able to report on those things and send those in real time. And then that data can be used to make better coaching decisions and things like that. The net outcome with that kind of real time prevention is that all the sites that we've been on have had absolutely 0 safety events. Some of that's due to the proactive AI. Some of it's just due to the fact that there's cameras on the sites, and it changes people's behaviors and how they work. But also in the area of just public safety, it's not good when utility assets are in various states of disrepair, and most utilities struggle to get the funding that they need to do proper maintenance on their program. And you know, that's tough. So there's not really, and we're in a labor shortage. We'll talk more about that throughout this presentation probably, but you know, how do you find inspectors to inspect all this stuff and make sure it's fixed and in good repair so people don't get hurt? And again, I think artificial intelligence is the way. For instance, we can fly fixed wing or drones, any kind of aerial vehicle or mobile mapping on a vehicle, or even walk and scan with LiDAR and imagery and tell the utility immediately what's wrong with their system when there's things broken in some state of disrepair. And that brings the cost of inspection way down, the frequency of inspection way up, the accuracy up. And, you know, just some of the benchmarking I've done, both working in and with utilities, is, you know, when the public gets hurt due to a utility issue, it's almost always, you know, or even worse, you know, it can be anywhere from 6 to 8 figure claim. And so again, that's you know, big money, and nobody, you know, we say safety first, and we try to back it up. And so those are ways that digital technology such as artificial intelligence can address safety.
Thanks, Jason. David, how does Origis use data to improve safety?
Sure. Well, you know, one of the good things about digitizing what we have done is, again, we don't have paper, right? We don't have paper flying around. It's smudged and nasty and becomes unreadable, right? You know, as we go through the process of like our daily JHA, right? We can go in there, and if the weather changes or something like that, we can add that in and re-review. You have other people come out, they're there, right? You know, we look at it for real-time data reporting. We do monitor on our sites a lot of the weather that's out there. You know, weather plays a big effect upon productivity and upon quality, right? If it's too hot outside, you got people falling out, right? And they may not be taking enough breaks, and they may just be tired. And so your quality and your productivity goes down, right? You know, one of the good things about our iPads that we have our things on is I have a couple NIOSH apps out there that covers, there's a heat index, right? That the guys can just go and look at, and it gives them a chart of where they're at, you know, in their locale, of what the heat index is, so that they know they need to take breaks. If we ever have something with chemicals, right? We have the SDS app on there, right? To where we can take care of that. It also allows us to do field audits really quick on our contractors that are out there in the field to make sure that they are following, you know, not only our safety, but their safety program. And then if we have an incident, right? One of the best things that I have in our thing is our incident program. They can go out, generate a report, we get the pictures, and we get that over to our safety team so that they can review it. So, and it's all stored. We don't have to worry about taking other pictures or writing stuff down. It's right there. And that also helps my safety director go back and look at, you know, what is our injury rates that are happening on the site, right? What do we need to look at and say, hey, maybe you guys need to put some more shoring in here or more barricading, because we've seen these incidents that are happening on the site, or near misses, right? Or not using a spotter. You know, we can kind of sit there and watch that kind of stuff. But then as we do our, you know, upper management reporting for your TIRR or TRIR, sorry, you know, things like that, you know, that data is right there, and all they have to do is just pull it up. Contractors' hours, everything. So it's really helped us on our side for, you know, my safety director to be able to pull the data that he needs to make the reports that he has to make. So.
Thanks, David. Jake, how about you? How do you see data being used to improve safety?
As a vendor, and David's a client, I should make sure that that's clear. Everybody knows that David's a Fulcrum client. Otherwise, this is going to sound weird. But a lot of the things that he's talking about are similar to the kind of things that we look for as well. I mean, I talked before about a model where I look for simple stuff, and I look for ways to transform existing processes, and I look for ways to reshape completely things that we didn't even know we were going to be looking at. So on some of the more straightforward things, I think about data sharing and reporting. So if you need to capture safety data and report to OSHA, then having that stuff digitized as opposed to in a file cabinet is going to make your life a lot easier. You're able to transform that into a report that you can easily hand off. If you need variations, splits, sorts, whatever, you can get that kind of stuff pretty easily. You can share it in spreadsheets or through web services or whatever it may be. So that's kind of core to what we do with data after we digitize. I think there's some existing processes that we currently do that are also being transformed. The idea of being able to supervise from a distance, especially with a smaller workforce. I need to be able to have experienced people looking at video, audio, and pictures of various things to make sure that they can validate that those things are right. If you look at some of the stuff that David's done, you'll see right in the record the photos of exactly what's going on, where there are quality issues, where there are any other kinds of problems. So those can be immediately remediated, and we know that fixing things earlier rather than later saves us a ton of money and time and so on. I think that geolocation is an important part of what happens, what we can do to improve things here. So, for example, this is not something I'm hearing about from David, but when you talk to some clients about making sure that inspectors are in the right place doing the right thing, being able to see that they took a picture where they were supposed to be taking that picture. Maybe they're doing pole inspections. They took a picture standing at that spot. You can see where the picture was taken. You can see that they were there when they took it. That's important to help detect and prevent fraud, for example. And we've seen cases where people have been fraudulent about the inspections they were doing. They didn't want to actually go out and inspect those holes, so they didn't. And this would help eliminate that. Now, with respect to things that we might reshape, Jason gave us a lot of discussion about AI. I agree with him fully that that's an area where we expect to see some explosive growth over the next little bit. How do you get the information that goes in to train an AI? An AI doesn't know automatically what a broken insulator looks like. So you need to be able to give it pictures that are good and pictures that are bad, things that you would normally see that are okay and things that you would see and say, oh, we got a problem here. So one of the things that we're doing as you go out and collect the data over and over again on these inspections is you're gathering information that can be used to train the AI to know what it should be looking for and highlighting to people afterwards. So I think that's another area that's being transformed. And finally, I'm going to dovetail off of something else Jason talked about, which is drones. Completely agree that drones are becoming more important, that they can identify problems or potential problems. We're going to see that continue to expand. I think that typically what we're going to see in most cases is kind of an eyes in the sky and boots on the ground combination. The drone comes in and is able to sample an entire solar array, for example, and see what's going on. It detects a couple of areas where it thinks there are or might be problems. It detects that with a certain amount of probability, and then somebody's going to walk out there and see what's going on, inspect that specific spot, and ensure that it is actually what the problem is, what we think it is, and remediate that problem as necessary. So again, simple, transforming existing and reshaping things entirely. I think those are some of the things that we should be looking for as far as improving safety.
Okay, thanks, Jake. You got three very interesting perspectives there. Now we've looked at how we can use data to improve safety. Let's tackle productivity and how we can use data to improve it. David, do you want to start us off, please?
Yeah, sure, no problem. As we go out and start a project, especially out in the solar industry, we go out and we put up the golden row of how everything's supposed to look. All the trackers are there, all the modules are there. This is how they're going to build it for us. And we go out and say, yay or nay, maybe we need to correct this, maybe we need to correct that. The good thing is it's real time available for our staff to go out and look at. That's even in the corporate office or the engineers or independent engineers, things like that, so that we can make sure that we're doing it right the first time, right? Because the more that we have to go back and redo, well, your productivity comes down, and that takes the bottom dollar away from our contractors when they're having to redo everything. The one good thing on our team, again, and I know I've reiterated this a lot, is that all of our blueprints, all of the inspections, your email, everything is on that one device, and it's being fed. There's no extra time for data entry. Real-time analytics can still go on. And then if the work assignment changes, if something needs to be done and looked at, we can go over and look at it a little bit faster, get the documents over and get it sent over. So I think that not having to go back and do stuff twice really makes productivity go up. You know, and then the other thing, and I'm talking about the quality side of it is that you know, the more that we catch in the field now during construction, the less they have to worry about when we're operating and maintaining. So.
Okay, thanks, David. As you keep talking or mentioning about blueprints being digitized, I keep thinking of that means that in the future disaster movies, people will be looking at going out to sites and looking at tablets rather than getting out of a pickup truck and dramatically unrolling the blueprints on the hood. But I'm sure we'll get used to that. So, Jake, you want to tell us a little bit about how you think businesses can use data to improve productivity?
Sure. Just as an aside there, Peter, you're reminding me of why so many popular shows are shows about things 50 and 100 years ago, because they can't just pull these magical solutions out and say, yep, that's it, all done.
Right.
We've already covered a number of the things that I think are going to improve productivity. Like David talked about using pick lists so that people aren't typing stuff in. I think there's a lot of technology that people are already using. Voice to text is very popular. Instead of typing something on a tablet, you're just going to speak into the tablet. It'll know what it is. I think there are some existing processes that are important. We've already talked about drones. Dealing with privacy issues is another one, and this is actually a specific application of AI. Like Jason talks about AI being used for certain use cases, but he talks about it as an application, and I think that's the right way to think about it. What problem am I trying to solve? In the case of privacy, frequently you're taking pictures. We had this issue with a large European customer of ours. If you take a picture and someone's face is in it, then the EU doesn't allow you to store that person's face in a database. So we use AI to automatically blur out that person's face, and that saves the time that it would take normally to go in and manually eliminate those kinds of photos and stuff like that. I think there's one of the places that we're going to see over time, and this has been a promise for 20 years, and we're slowly getting better at it, but it's a really difficult problem to solve, is bringing together lots of different kinds of systems, right? So when I inspect a forklift, when I inspect a cherry picker, I'm actually doing something that indicates what the condition is of a piece of equipment and where it's located at a particular point in time. That's an asset management issue, right? So being able to bring that information to asset management systems and making sure that that information is shareable to help us understand what's our inventory look like, where are our spools of wire, where's all the stuff that we need to have. That's one example of the kind of systems integration that's going to continue to drive productivity further than when we were walking around with paper and spreadsheets and stuff like that in a kind of disconnected or less connected way.
Okay, thank you very much. We've looked now, we've gotten done with the how data can be used to improve productivity and safety. And since both of those are kind of largely field issues, and the next two topics we'll cover are more organization-wide, this seems like a good place to take a question or two from the audience. Matt, do we have anything?
Yeah, I think we have a good question or two we can share. One of them that came in said that some of the use cases mentioned during this conversation just now, it mentioned how data can be used to improve safety and productivity, involve surveilling work crews. But the audience member is wondering, does that present any problems in terms of getting buy-in from those crews? And if so, what sort of best practices might you have come across to deal with those?
Jake, you want to take it first, and then David? You can all
Sure. I mean, I'm focused largely on the kind of data infrastructure and software side of the house. So speaking for myself, I don't like to be surveilled while I'm working, right? So I definitely think that that's not ideal. I think that by applying the processes we're talking about to points in time, making sure that the quality is right, when that project is completed, making sure that you're doing a sweep of the area as a safety inspection before you do it, inspecting the machine before you do it. You're not surveying people the entire time. So I don't know that it's necessary to have video recordings on all the time everywhere to ensure that happens. That is definitely a personnel issue, though, and you're right that I feel that people would feel they don't want Big Brother watching them all the time. I get that.
David, are you seeing any issues with that in the field?
Well, I mean, most of our safety audits that we're doing is we're going up to the guys in the field and we're just watching what they're doing, and we're going to ask them some simple questions. Where's your paperwork? Where's your JHA? You know, if there's anything that we see that's kind of going on, we kind of make a recommendation. You know, hey, you're in a trench and I don't see a point of egress, so let's get a ladder in there. Or maybe we need to get, you know, a rope around something. Or, you know what, I noticed when you were lifting this that, you know, once you kind of do this a little bit different, you know, kind of save your back. You know, I don't think that I agree with Jake that I don't like Big Brother watching. But I think, though, that if they know that Big Brother's watching, it keeps people honest, right? And I think that maybe sometimes we need to keep people honest because people will take shortcuts. And those shortcuts, you know, one little injury could cost a company millions of dollars of somebody taking the shortcut. So I think I get the whole non-buy-in from, you know, that the teams have cameras on all the time. But I think it's also a good reminder that, hey, somebody could be watching, whether it's a human or whether it's a drone or whether it's a camera. So, you know, do it right the first time.
Jason, what about you? Are you seeing anybody experiencing problems? Any of the companies you're working with experiencing problems from the workers about the surveillance stuff?
No, we haven't gotten any, you know, major blowback or anything like that. In fact, some of the contractors that we work with are interested because they're struggling too. I brought up, you know, we're in a labor shortage in the United States here. You know, just recently I was out with the director of construction at one utility, and he said, you know, forget the bench. These contractors aren't getting guys off the bench. The bench is empty. They're pulling people off the street who've never handled a chainsaw before, who've never climbed up a pole, and they're putting them on job sites. And they're struggling too with their own safety and their training and everything. And I'll tell you, like our technology, for instance, one thing they use it for more than anything is coaching. They use some of the recorded video and some of the situations that they see. You know, a lot of these things, when we first showed up, they're like, oh man, people don't take their hard hat off when they're working. We're way beyond that. You know, we've seen it happen thousands of times. You know, people were coming in and showing up late and leaving early, and you know, cheating on their time cards, and you know, there were just a lot of issues going on with just lack of training on these job sites. And having that camera feed going and having it recording, and having some proactive alerts really changed the way people work. So there was a little bit of frustration from, you know, the folks in the field, but there's never been anything that's been major blowback. And the results are is that people working more safely than ever. People aren't getting hurt. And to tell you the truth, the productivity's gone through the roof because people, like David was kind of just mentioning, they know that they can't get away with things that they were, you know, used to get away with, whether that's intentional, and not everybody is thinking about taking shortcuts. Some people just aren't trained. You know, they're not trained properly. And so it's really helped the companies we've worked with, and it's been overwhelmingly positive. Anytime that like a union or other on-site contract personnel, if there's any frustration, it's not anything that's like, you know, really bubbled up in a bad way.
Okay.
You know, it's interesting, Peter. I like to look at historically how things have changed as an indicator where things might go from here. And one group that has definitely had that issue is police officers, right? Body cams. And I think there was a lot of resistance at first, but now I know a fair number of cops, and the ones who are good. I mean, I think I only know good ones, right? But they want the body cams now because it's good for them too, and they know it, and it's evidence that they're doing a good job. So we're probably going, if there's resistance and there needs to be buy-in, there probably will need to be some in certain cases, like I was saying, but eventually good people know that it helps them and verifies that they're doing the right thing. So a second thought on my initial answer.
Thanks. Okay, we'll take some more questions later after we conclude the discussion, or at the end of the discussion. And so now let's get back to the topics we're covering. And the next one that's up, we've covered safety and productivity. So now we'll look at how data can be used to improve reliability. And Jake, why don't you start us with that, please?
Sure. When we were talking about reliability before. I mean, there's reliability in the sense that we think of in utilities, which is keep the lights on, right? How am I making sure I'm keeping the lights on? And I think what we're really talking about here is how we keep the data flowing, right? When we sense that something is wrong, whether it's from a drone, whether it's from, you know, somebody's camera seeing something, like Jason could demo to you if we were doing that kind of thing. He can take his camera and show you looking up at a light and seeing that there's a problem with it, and that's the way it gets communicated. Or whether it's a person who's doing an inspection across, you know, according to a very specific kind of inspection process, that's a form of communication. How do we ensure that that gets captured? And remember, that's the digitization part in some ways. And then how does the data keep flowing through to the rest of the organization in appropriate ways? If you see that there's a safety issue, if you see that there's a quality issue, then we need to make sure that we're going to do the right kind of follow-up and remediation. And once we've done the remediation, there might need to be a reinspection or something along those lines. We want to know that the stuff that we're looking at is properly, you know, is in the right databases in the right places. So how do we make that information flow such that we're not just focusing on the safety, quality, and maintenance inspections that we're doing, but also every action that we take, every follow-on action that we take. And if you think about it, remediation is not something that normally is thought of as data collection. Remediation is an action. It's not collecting data, it's doing something. But in reality, remediation is data collection. It's saying, I'm at this location fixing this problem. It's taking me this much time, which is related to your delays and your ROI on inspection processes and so on. It's I'm using this much material. That's all data that then should be feeding into the overall vision of what we're doing as an organization and helping us improve our processes in the future. The more data we collect, the more that data flows to more people and the right people at the right time, the more we can keep the lights on, so to speak, from a reliability perspective.
Thanks, Jay. Jason, what about you? How do you see data being used to improve reliability?
So, you know, couple areas that are tracked when I talk to some executives in utilities, VP level and higher, they talk about there's customer affordability, but then there's customer satisfaction. A lot of that has to do with reliability. And they're struggling with how to commoditize that. How do you know what risk to buy down? How do you commoditize that risk and actually say what the benefit is? If you don't even have an inspection program, and some utilities don't, and others have really robust inspection programs, but if you don't even have the observe step, and the way we look at inspection is observe, identify, alert, decision. Those are the 4 things, all right? And then you can get into prioritization and optimization eventually, like Jake said, action. But if you can't even do the observation steps and understand the data around what risks are on your system, you can't commoditize it, and then you can't know what to buy down and how to optimize it. So we're trying to bite off each one of those steps systematically. And again, I think AI can make a vastly higher and more accurate number of observations on a utility system. And then the challenge will be you'll have tons more data than you've ever had before, which ironically most utilities don't want, because it's either discoverable or it's just you're choking on data. And then again, AI comes in and says, well, I can analyze large amounts of data and start to look at prioritization and optimization scenarios to give you scenarios on what risk to buy down so that you can communicate to your customers, meaning the utility communicating their customers, here's how we're actually buying down risk and increasing reliability for you guys. And that's a huge task, but we're working on that right now.
When you're talking about that, about buying down risk, do you think that type of thing, have you ever seen that type of thing? And do you think that type of thing will come into play for utilities if regulators move more to performance-based reviews?
Yeah,
or
that's a good,
rate setting, I mean.
Yeah, I think it'll have to. Performance-based rate setting, number one. And I didn't touch on customer affordability, but utilities are going to become more and more competitive. They're going to enter a market of competition, and you're already seeing it as they divest generation assets. And it's just going to keep going. And if they don't know how to buy down risk, it's going to be a real challenge to stay in that affordable area. And if you can't be affordable and you can't be reliable, it's going to be a challenge. And most of the time when I talk to supervisors, managers, and directors, you know, the conversations are different than when you get to senior vice president and all of that. And I kind of view that as a disconnect and one we can bridge sometimes, because a lot of these SVPs, EVPs, and COOs are sitting here going, you know, how are we going to actually transform our company to survive the next 10, 15, 20 years? Because it's going to change so much once it's competitive landscape.
Thanks. David, what about you? You're on the generation side, albeit the renewable generation side. How do you see data being used to improve reliability? And is that something, how are you guys doing it?
Well, you know, you got to build it right the first time, right? You don't need to go back and build it again 2 and 3 different times. So I think that as we go through our criteria of our quality inspections, you know, we're doing a sampling, and we look at a certain percentage of the project that's being built. If we start seeing more discrepancies at a certain threshold, then we up our inspections, right? We will go from maybe 10% to say 30%. You know, when we get into that area, that's when we're stopping the contractor and saying, hey, this is what we're seeing, right? Maybe we all need to get together and go back and refocus and figure out, you know, what we can do to make this better to where we're not seeing these deficiencies. You know, when your operations team is out there after construction and they have modules falling off, right? Or we've got ground faults, or we have MC4 connectors that are falling apart. You know, maybe we need to look at those areas a little bit more during construction, to where they're not having to spend their time doing corrective maintenance when they should be doing their preventative maintenance, right? Or we should be looking at, you know, other things. You know, the other good thing about the data that's there is if we have a warranty claim, right? And we go back and see that we have a serial defect, and we see that over time, you know, that this issue is there, and it's even approaching a serial defect. All the data is right there, right? You don't have to go back and search through documents through, you know, from construction and go through paper. It's all documented right there. And then, you know, I also think that as you go into problems on the site, the good thing is our services team has access to our data, and they can go back and get the tribal knowledge of what happened on that area of the project, right? We were having issues in this area with erosion. This is what they did. This is what they did to remediate it. Did it work? So.
Jason, say something about what you just touched on. It gets into something I'd written about before, which is digital twins. But that type of thing you were talking about, David, about you can look at a project, we've had problems here, and then you can figure out, well, the next one might have these problems. You're just one company. I mean, if you're like a software company like Jason's is or Jake's is, you're dealing with multiple companies. Can you then, you know, run AI or machine learning across all the stuff you see from all of them to improve, you know, safety and reliability at any one of them?
We're not doing that yet, but that's coming on my side. So, but you know, the good thing is though, is that like if we see an issue on a certain sub project that we're building, we will feed that data over to the other project, even though it has a different contractor, and say, hey, this is what we saw on this site. You know, we may want to take a look at it. And that actually has come up on one of our sites that we're currently building right now, that we had a project where the modules were falling off. And, you know, we found that through going through and inspecting the site there, our quality team. And we went back and said, hey, something's wrong here. And so the manufacturer went back and did a case study and said, hey, you know what, we need to increase the torque on these. And then we also found out through that when they were running the clamps on, that they were using Makita nut runners. Well, come to find out, if that battery goes below, and it was at a preset torque, let me say that at the thing, if the battery went below 50%, it wouldn't go all the way to that torque, right? So they had to change batteries more, right, to make the torque right. And we had to go back and redo the whole site. So.
Thanks. That kind of gets into the last part of this we'll look at, which is using data to improve decision making. So basically, Jason, you want to start us off with about how data can be used throughout the organization, and since you're dealing with multiple companies, throughout multiple organizations to improve decision making.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of funny. Somebody told me one time, and this wasn't in my, prep for this, but I was thinking about decisions. You have 4 frogs on a log and 3 decide to jump off. How many are left? And there's still 4 frogs on the log because a decision isn't an action, And it's like, it's just, there's a lot of decisions going on, and what are the actions we're really going to take? And a lot of times we're making low information decisions and taking action. And then, for a long time, utilities were covered by management prudence. What was the information you had at the time? Well, it was low, but that's what you had. And now they're expecting, Peter, you brought up rate making. And rate making is going to be more and more based on 2 things. One is best practice. I expect you to use decision making based on best practice, not just the best information you had at the time. And incentives. And so, what we're looking at kind of down the road is prioritization and optimization to be able to, buy down this risk. And if you've got low information, you're going to make low quality decisions. And if it's not based on consistent best practices, it's going to be challenged heavily in the rate making process when those investments are made. And so again, I just think in terms of artificial intelligence, we're moving into a world where rate makers and everybody is going to be demanding way more information than I even thought was humanly possible when I first entered the utility industry. And the only way to gather that information and process it is going to be using artificial intelligence. So I've got more thoughts there, but tried to condense it as much as I could.
David, what about you? How do you see data being used to improve decision making?
Well, and I go back to build it right the first time, right? I think that as we look at the life cycle of a project, let's just say during the building process of it, that wire management, do we use UV rated zip ties or do we go to a solar bundler, right? Which is a metal zip tie. Do we do that during construction and absorb that cost, or is it more cost effective to just change out the ones that we need to throughout the 20 years of the project? So I think that's one of the decisions you have to make is, am I going to use a little bit better product for the long run and absorb that cost in the beginning, or do we spread it out over time, through the project? I think that you also, when you're looking at all the data coming in, is how long did it take, right? Could we have done it quicker? What could we have done? I think that we're also looking on decision making of safety wise, right? As you're bringing in all the weather data and you're looking at all the hours in the field versus the production that went on, during certain periods of the year, I think you can make the decision of how you need to staff up, right? We know that we're going to lose a lot of time in a heat wave, right? Or when it's bitter cold. I mean, those are just known factors. But what about certain areas of the country that you're building in? Are you going to get the job done? Do we need to extend the time, right, of the project, of how long it's going to take to build, or can we get it done quicker? I think there's just lots of things that the data we can go back and look at as it comes in to make decisions of how do we build it better, how do we build it quicker, how do we build it cheaper, and how do we make it last? That's the thing.
Thanks, David. Jake, what about you? How are you seeing data being used to improve decision making?
I'm going to get to that in a second, but I actually want to go back to Jason's frog thing for a second. Because he gave an answer and it wasn't the one I was expecting. I had envisioned 4 frogs on a mid-sized log, right? Not something big. So when he said 3 frogs choose to jump and 1 doesn't, how many are left on the log? My answer was going to be none. Because when those 3 frogs jump, the other one, the 4th one, ends up getting bumped off, right? The log rocks and the other one falls off. I thought it was going to be a competition joke, right? If three of the frogs are moving in a certain direction, you might be left behind. That's where I thought it was going, and I think probably both interpretations are valid. Although Jason, you're welcome to argue with me if you'd like.
I love it.
I think it's a cool idea. So with respect to how we use data for decision making, I think it's worth it to think about it along a couple of different dimensions, right? There's the the individual person. Who am I talking about making better decisions? It might be the person standing out there in the field doing an inspection or doing some remediation work. What does that person get from better data? Typically, it's going to be higher confidence, right? If they are using a map that's on their mobile device to say, here's exactly where you should be standing, and they see on the map that they're standing there, and they are seeing the specific things that are supposed to be at that point on the map, that's really valuable for them. Where does that come from? Typically some kind of large geographic information system or something like that that was used for the planning, but having that individual person being able to have that on their mobile device helps their confidence. Just tying in, Jason's got some cool technology, I gotta say, and having the ability for that person to be able to scan what's going on and use that visual imaging to an interpretation to be able to say, this is what I think I've got. That's also confidence for that person. And when confidence increases, productivity increases. And just to counterbalance that, if there's a lack of confidence, if there's a reason for them not to have that level of confidence, maybe they should step back for a second and say, am I looking at the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And makes them hesitate at the right time. So that data for that individual person is valuable. But then there are also team leaders all the way up through executives, citizens, policymakers, whatever, who also are going to be interested in using that data for different decisions. And that's where we get into more, the kinds of things we think about, where I've got a dashboard that tells me, how well am I servicing a given area that has a certain demographic to it. I need to make sure that I'm servicing that demographic appropriately and I'm not shortchanging that area just because it's poorer. Or whatever the situation might be. You need to be really on top of that stuff. So having that collection of data from more than one location across potentially multiple projects and being able to say, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. I'm not just doing things well, I'm doing the right thing. I think that's critically important for those higher levels of decision maker. So that's one dimension. Am I talking about the person standing in the field, or am I talking about the person sitting behind a desk or wearing a suit? The other dimension I want to consider is operational versus strategic thinking. Both of those are critically important. Operational because we can't execute effectively if we don't know what's going on, and strategically because we're not executing the right thing if we're not thinking about things in a strategic way. So that dimension, I think, is also very important for us. And it's been studied for a long time. I'm not going to go into it here, but I think, back when I was in the Marine Corps, we learned about something called the OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, and act, right? So there's that decision and action. That frog, those three frogs weren't acting, right, Jason? So they're a critical part of the loop. If you're familiar with Dr. Deming, who did total quality management, he talked about the PDCA cycle. And I had PDCA in my head just a moment ago, and now I'm not going to be able to remember exactly what it is, but it's the same kind of a loop, right? It's you're going to plan, decide, check, and act, I think is what it is. So what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? If we think about how we use data at each stage of those individual loops, for each type of person, for each level, whether it's very tactical and operational or whether it's more strategic, I think we start to come up with a lot of different ways that data can be used in order to become more effective with the data that we have. And by the way, that leads us to want to collect more different kinds of data. It leads us to say, we've got this kind of data over here, we have a gap over this way, let's go figure out what's going on there. And that leads you to the next evolution of your data collection processes, of your inspection, remediation, all the things we've been talking about, but well beyond that too. Where am I going to get that data to help me make those decisions? So it feeds itself as well as part of an overall process. Hope that made sense, but those couple of dimensions I think are really critical.
You kind of spurred a quick thought, on that operational versus strategic, and a use case that we're working on and we're close to deploying with a southern utility. is around hurricane storm damage assessment. And at first they just wanted to use planes flying with LiDAR. And, we would evaluate all of the LiDAR with artificial intelligence to quickly, like within the first 24 to 36 hours post-storm, tell you what's damaged. And that's really good operational decision making when it can take, over a week to find that information with people on the ground. So that's really exciting. But then strategically they go, oh my gosh, if we could know all of this geographically, like you said, on a GIS system, and it's all tied to our circuits and assets, we could start to even do things like change where we put our staging areas and strategic laydown yards after the storm, and get the right material and the right people to the right place at the right time faster. And so the business case went from, oh, we could save a few $1 million to we could save tens of millions of dollars when you really look at the impact of that rapid, good decision-making data coming in post-storm. So that was a good point that you made. Operational can affect strategic decision-making.
That's a superb use case, and they're not just saving a lot of money there, they're also saving the amount of time it takes for to engage in response to the storm. They're reducing the amount of time people are without power, et cetera, and yeah, yes. Like it's just a superb example. Thank you. I think we actually have the same company as a customer too. We were talking about that prior. I think it's the same company we're talking about.
Well, thank you. That concludes the structured portion of our power session. And I was wondering if, going back, and now we've covered a lot of ground, if you have kind of final thoughts you wanted to add. David, we'll start off with you.
We go into, we're talking about the hurricane now, right? And we have a few sites in that area that were under construction. And we needed to go out and do a little bit of pre-planning and make sure things were secure, and let's start evacuating sites and locking things down. And one of the good things, and I'm gonna throw it out to Fulcrum, I was literally able to jump in there in about 45 minutes, create a great app. We're able to document everything that happened on the site. We're able to give out daily, updates from the data that was coming in from that. And man, it just really saved us a lot of time. And all the data is there, right? And luckily, none of our things were affected from the construction side. But, I think the more stuff that we do digital, it's there to be able to share, and it's easy to analyze. And I think we've done a great job doing it. I'm so excited to meet Jason and to have worked with Jake. Like Jason and I spent probably an hour and a half the other day on the phone just talking about his company and use cases for us for the future. And man, there's some really cool stuff out there. So that's all I've got, really.
Jason, now David's kind of primed the pump up talking about some really cool stuff out there. You want to give us a hint of what that might be? And if you have any other thoughts, add them too, please.
Yeah, I mean, so just in the areas that David and I were talking, it's just, solar, I brought up earlier, utilities are divesting generation assets, but that's not really true in the case of solar. They're investing. And I think the investment right now is so small, like in 2022 compared to what it's even going to be in 23 and 24. I mean, you're just going to see it explode. And, for instance, these solar fields are vast. And when we look at a solar field, we go, oh, that's kind of interesting. Look at that off to the side of the highway, But it's mind-blowing to think that there could be, 1 million or more tiny little connections that need to be inspected. 1 million panels. Are they, like David said, are they installed the first time? I mean, rework is a killer. And also to a utility, operations and maintenance cost is black death compared to capital installation cost. So rework is like a double killer because you got to pay for it. And typically you pay O&M, operation and maintenance. So it's just, but then you're talking about getting inspectors out there personally to go through and do all these inspections. It's just brutal to think about. Are there really the people to do that coming up in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years to explode this solar installation and do the inspections properly? So You know, again, there's a lot of opportunities for artificial intelligence to use infrared inspection, computer vision inspection, and LiDAR inspection in lots of ways that were super cool to talk to David about on how to get that done. And really, you know, the technology that Jake's company is utilizing, this inspection platform, all of that is where this data would live, right? It's a different collection methodology. And so it's just really exciting to be in this place right now at this time. And I think there's a lot of opportunities abounding to create some value.
Jake, what about you? Talk about your company's platform. Where do you see it going?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting about Jason and me both being on the same webcast is that we have, and talking about the same issues and the same, you know, how to use data to improve all these things, is that what we do is very different, and yet they're complementary in a lot of ways. The ability for Fulcrum to support an individual person who's out there just trying to digitize his inspections right now, just trying to make the area that he works in safer, is connected to the fact that Fulcrum could also be a very large scale platform that incorporates not only hundreds or thousands of individual inspectors, but also other technologies such as AI and so, you know, drones and so on as well. So we're at a really interesting time from a technology perspective right now with the way these things come together. And I guess if I have a closing thought, it would be that you've heard a lot today. If you've listened for the whole time, then you've heard a lot of different things, different concepts, and it can be a little bit overwhelming to look at it all and say, where do I start? And I think it's worth, you know, continuing to explore what's going on. Think pragmatically about where your biggest pain points are right now and how you're going to, address some of the specific requirements you have at the moment. But keep your fingers in multiple pies. I mean, there are people out there right now who need computer vision, and that's really the thing that they need to get past a bottleneck right now. And later on, they're going to say, you know, I also need an inspection management platform that's going to help incorporate all of this stuff into a bigger picture. And that's fine. That's one path. The other people are saying, I just need to do my quality inspections better right now. How do I digitize that and start gathering the information that I need to? And later on, they're going to realize that to do quality inspections at scale, it helps to have that computer vision. So there's no one answer here. And I recommend that you just start, just start talking to people, look at where your specific bottlenecks seem to be right now. Look for places where you'd like to know more, you'd like to have data, and the data is not flowing. That's usually a good point to start saying, okay, well, I need to think about digitization for this specific area, and then start to turn that problem into a plan. And as Jason pointed out earlier, it's not an action until you actually act, right? So a plan is good, but you got to act on that plan. Don't overanalyze what you're doing. Start somewhere, and you'll probably, not be perfect the first time you get started, but that's okay, because that'll give you experience that helps you move on to the next one. Start with something that's a little bit important, because if you really dramatically improve something nobody cares about, then nobody will care that you improved it. But also because you're probably going to struggle a little bit the first time around, do something that's not, bet your career on it either. Like start now with a respectable project that's going to make a difference to somebody, and get going there. That's a bit of a ramble, but hopefully you see where I'm coming from. At least I think the most important thing to do is get started now.
In other words, the most important thing to do is be the frog that gets off the log. So
right, exactly. There you go, Jason. That's going to stick with all of us now.
Yeah, everything comes back to that aphorism. That seems like a good point to wrap this up. PJ, you have some things to add, I think, at the end now.
I do, and I think we may have a couple more questions before I jump in. Matt, was there anything else from the floor before we wrap up today's event?
Yeah, thanks, PJ. And there's one question that came in towards the end that I think is pretty good, and I don't mean to put any on the spot with it. But we'll see what you think. But one of our audience members asked which utilities are doing the best job in terms of translating data into performance. And even if you don't want to name names, the second part of that is, well, what are those utilities doing differently? So, what makes one utility stand out in this regard above others?
Who wants to start? Anybody?
It's dangerous to name names if I haven't talked to them about using their name in public, so I'm not going to do that. But I think the ones that we've seen do the best are those who have started with something relatively straightforward. I'm thinking here pole inspections. We do a ton of pole inspections, and then start to leverage one success into the next one. Say, okay, well, I see the use case for pole inspections. Now, what else should I be using this for? It's really that expansion, that scaling of both the mindset and the way that you're using software that really helps you more dramatically improve over time. My opinion, Jason, David, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Don't have any thoughts on the utility sides of things, but
Sure, fair enough.
About you.
Yeah, I've worked with, probably for about the past 6-7 years with other utilities all across the nation. And so, yeah, I'd agree with everything that Jake just said. There are a few hints I'd give. There's one large deregulated utility that does a lot of wind generation projects across North America that comes to mind. And they just repeatedly show that they're very advanced in their thinking and ability to deploy really innovative things, shockingly for a utility. And I say that coming from utilities, okay? It's just, the beast. It's hard, it's slow, There's a lot of organizational momentum that goes the other way sometimes. But yeah, these guys have done a great job. And then the utility I came from, I'll just use them kind of unashamedly, but Ameren seems to do a really good job. I know a lot of really good people there that have got their hearts and minds in the right place and are willing to take a calculated risk, like Jake said, pick a respectable project that's worth pursuing that can make a little bit of a difference and move forward and see what happens. And they don't get too locked up on that. And we've done some really cool things with them, and not just us as Cobra Vision, but just working for them and with them. That's just the culture there. So,
And you had talked about AI in relation to, we talked about it in relation to solar and a lot in terms of checking out installations and that type of thing. It's also used in siting, right? I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, a utility in the Northeast, I think, said it was putting together essentially a program that would enable it to be able to tell any of its customers how well suited their roof was for solar. Are you seeing that at all, Jason?
oh yeah. Anything that's repeatable. Number one, if you can see it, AI can see it. If you can't see it, maybe AI can still see it in the cases of infrared and things like that. And if it's repeatable, it's easy to train on comparatively to things that aren't repeatable. So we're going to be having a completely different conversation 5 years from now, because right now I think the world is still waiting to see how good AI is going to be. And 5 years from now, we're going to see a lot of stuff that just didn't work, but we're going to see a lot of stuff that's working way better than we thought it ever could.
David, do you use AI and machine learning at all in determining where to site things, or do you not have to?
Our development team does, yes. I mean, they have a lot of things that they go back and evaluate to see where we're going to build a site, and it's going to be, productive. What do we need to change? Where do we actually need to move things into? So, yeah.
Okay. Matt, do you have any more questions?
No, I agree with Jason. Like the way that we do things within, I would say, the next 2 years is going to be absolutely amazing. It's going to be really cool stuff.
Just out of curiosity, why do you think that? What types of things do you think will be affected?
No, I just think that, with some things that Jason and I have talked about, but just even our field inspections, right? During construction, and then even after construction using AI, with some equipment that's out there that you're not having to send a human out there to take care of it. You're actually going to be able to use something that's motorized. And we talked about using a like the bomb squad uses, right? A little track vehicle, right? To go out and go underneath the panels and you're looking at things. We even talked about on the mowers, right? Where that stuff can send stuff back to the service and operations group and say, hey, when I was out mowing yesterday, guess what I found? And then you send the team out there to go out and verify and fix those problems right there, right? It's freshly mowed. They're not having to go through the grass. They can go out and fix it, right? And then, you know, your productivity is up. The reliability of your plan is up. There's some really awesome stuff out there that can be done. So
I think it's worth mentioning because this happens a lot in just generally speaking, people who talk about business intelligence, analytics, AI, and so on. One of David's phrases there was really important, that you send a team out there to verify. AI is often seen as somewhat of a black box, right? You train it on a lot of data and then it gives you output. But it's very difficult to ask it why it made that decision. There's this whole field right now that's dedicated to transparent AI. And so if you don't know why the AI told you that, it's very difficult to say to a regulator, well, I did this the right way. At this current point in time, and I think that's changing, by the way, but at this current point in time, that's hard to do. So I think there is a very often that eyes in the sky, boots on the ground kind of requirement where you are able to scale massively by sending out your drones, and out of that entire field, you're able to pick out 2 places that are really important. And then you're not sending out teams of people to sweep the entire field. You're able to find the 2 places where you do need someone to go out and verify and do the remediation or whatever needs to be done. So it's that there's a balance to be struck. Depending on where transparent AI goes, that we'll see whether that continues. But there's that balance to be struck as a requirement to make sure that you are able to demonstrate that when you did the site survey or when you did your quality or safety inspections, that you know, you're validating what the AI is telling you. And Jason, I know I'm stepping on your turf a little bit too as I say that. Do you have any thoughts or feedback on that? What I just said? Do you agree with it, or do you have argumentation against it?
Yeah, we look at it as a difference between self-driving, full self-driving mode and not. You know, we're not right now building any kind of AI that's what we call full self-driving mode. The vehicle is making decisions for the driver. No, we're making predictions with confidence levels and then delivering those predictions with confidence levels to inspectors or people to review them. And our hope is that maybe across vast distances, right? We're looking at maybe shield wire on top of a transmission line. Well, 80 miles, you know, let's say you're on a 40-mile transmission line, it's 80 miles of shield wire. That's incredibly difficult for any inspector to look at. So if we can at least find the 18 spots on that line where there's frayed wire relatively quickly, we still want them to look at that prediction and validate it. But that saves a lot of time still. Right.
Huge.
So, right. And then they can start to ask, why was that prediction made? I don't agree with that one. I don't agree with the severity. Actually, this one's more severe than what the AI predicted. And then that has to be a really collaborative experience between us and the folks on the ground so that we can improve the AI as well. You know, it's got to be better. It's got to be great AI, not just good.
Totally. No, that was really good explanation. And I think the fact that it's not an either or, there tends to be this depending on who you're listening to, there tends to be an either or mentality about it's either AI or it's not AI. And that's actually not the case. AI and human intelligence work fist and glove to get the job done. But AI helps you scale in a way that you would never be able to do if you had to go through all of those things manually, or you had to send everybody out in a truck to manage those 80 miles of wire or whatever it might be. So just keep that in mind as you're thinking about, to the audience now, just keep that in mind as you're thinking about the kinds of, the ways that you're going to use people and the ways you're going to use AI. It's not an either or, really AI is a force multiplier, a massive force multiplier for people at this point in time.
And that reminds me of a phrase I heard in IT a long time ago, probably from somebody famous, but I can't remember who said it. It was that computers are really dumb, but they're really fast, whereas people are really smart, but they're slow. And I mean, when you're talking about inspecting those 80 miles of wire, that's exactly what you're talking about. The computers can go out and do it and inspect it, but when you get to places where you really think something's wrong, you need somebody to go in and check it, I think. Is that what you mean?
Bingo. That's a great way to put it.
Yep. We're not at Skynet yet.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because what we have is still going to be a massive improvement over where we've been. So that's okay.
Yeah, Skynet, I think, might be a little much. Matt, do we have any other questions?
The only other one I see that I'd like to bring up is, so you guys all talked about hurricanes and preparing for that earlier, but this audience member mentioned that, and also the world of cyber threats that utilities are now dealing with and attacks in recent years that reveal weaknesses on the grid. And so they were just curious if you could provide, what are some critical lessons learned from, those type of events and challenges as well, and how that impact, across stakeholders from industry, policymakers, and others, if you have any stories or thoughts on that side of things.
Anybody?
I could just take a quick stab and just caveat it with, I'm not, and our company's not in the cybersecurity business, but there's an aspect of cybersecurity that involves physical security, particularly in SIP, critical infrastructure protection, SIP rulings for substations. And so in the areas of SIP security for substations that involve cameras and operational security, we are starting to work with some utilities to explore ways that we can use artificial intelligence to make that detection, observation, and recognition and identification, those 4 things, better for substations to reduce, potential security weaknesses at substations.
David, do you have anything to add about that? I don't know. Is that something you deal with at all?
No, we don't deal with that, but I think that Jason's absolutely right. Like what he's doing on that is that needs to be done. I mean, I have a Vivint camera on my front door, right? It lets me know when I get a package, right? I mean, that's using AI, right? So we can do the same thing in substations to take care of that critical infrastructure, right? That's very simple stuff that we can do.
Jake?
Same basic answer. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, would be very wary about giving specific advice or details. There are some clear use cases for AI, for physical protection, but I don't want to go any further than that, just because I don't have the competency on that area.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. PJ, is now a good time to throw it over to you?
I think we've covered just as much as we can today. Thank you so much. Panelists, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for your participation. For our audience, we'd like to thank you also for coming on and listening and adding your comments along the way. As you log off, please take a minute to complete our survey. Give us your feedback so we can continue to provide you with quality content. Thank you once again to Fulcrum for sponsoring this really interesting conversation that we've had today. From everyone here at Energy Central, thank you for joining us. We hope to see you on an upcoming Power Session. Have a great day. This concludes today's event.